Hello there, and welcome to Real Talk. I'm your host, Andrew Vick, and in case you haven't noticed, I've become a little obsessed with the VHS tape. There's something just really fascinating about them, and you may not believe it at first, but I'm going to convince you that this piece of old technology is going to be the very next vinyl. But I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so why don't we just rewind a little bit? The VHS hit American markets in 1976, with the first film ever to be released on the format being a 1972 South Korean drama. Weird choice, but okay. Videotapes were only just rising to prominence in the 1970s, which is wild considering how often we can just rent a movie and watch it on our TVs, phones, and computers. Could you even imagine living in a time before VHS? I imagine it was like, once a movie leaves the theater, you never see it again. And how convenient that the VHS was rising around the same time the blockbuster was beginning to take form with Jaws and Star Wars. These kinds of movies thrive off being seen multiple times. Well, why not sell personal copies that people can watch over and over again? It was a market that was about to explode. Everything just came together at the right time. And who else would take advantage of a booming market than the House of Mouse? Yeah, I know it's weird to think, but before the Disney we know now as the massive corporate entity that controls pop culture with a snap of its fingers, Disney used to be thought of as a family-friendly company that made animated movies for all ages. This is probably due in part to a lot of us seeing their classic movies when we were kids, but this early sense of trust almost never happened. The higher-ups back in the day thought releasing their classic films on home video would hurt financial opportunities for future films. With the benefit of hindsight, this seems a little silly, as releasing these movies on video is probably what helped them to become so powerful today. One of the earliest films they tested this out with was Pinocchio, selling tapes at the price of $79.95. That's almost $200 when adjusted for inflation. But it worked. About 125,000 copies were sold. They did this again with some of their other classic films, but it wasn't until 1986 when they did this huge marketing campaign for their first animated film, Sleeping Beauty. It was moved to a lower price of $29.95, about $75 in today's money, but it was a huge success, selling over 1 million copies. After that, the rest is history. Did you know that there was a whole format war over videotapes? I'll give you the abridged and shoddily researched version. Through the 70s and 80s, there were two different formats of videotape that were competing for dominance over the market. The VHS tapes we're familiar with, and Sony's Betamax tapes, also known as beta tapes. Beta tapes easily stick out. They're smaller than a VHS, and they only have one spool exposed in the front instead of two.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
Reportedly, they're also slightly higher quality on the video and audio front. It's also worth noting that these two formats were incompatible with each other. You can't watch a VHS on a beta player and you can't watch a beta on a VHS player. So why didn't beta tapes come out on top? From what I found, there were a few factors that led to their downfall. For one, they started off with an incredibly pitiful recording time, only around an hour's worth of tape. Compare that to VHS's 2 hours worth, which at the time could easily get most films from beginning to end. And yes, I know a lot of VHS tapes can go over 2 hours now. This was back in the old days. You think I haven't seen Return of the King? The other was how few manufacturers were actually making them. VHS was licensed out to a ton of companies during the early days, but Sony for the longest time was the only one making beta tapes. It's like how Windows is licensed out for use with a ton of different computer companies, but Apple's iOS system is only available on their devices. Though instead of competing over one of the most powerful devices of the modern age, it was basically, what are you going to use to watch Terminator? Long story short, VHS came out on top, and beta tapes became fossilized, a relic of a time that history forgot. Though, as we all know, VHS tapes didn't last forever. In the late 90s, the DVD was introduced and slowly began to take over the market.
This is DVD. And this is what happens when you watch DVD. The picture is twice as sharp as VHS. The sound is infinitely clearer. It looks and sounds like you're at the movies, but you can experience it at home. With over 3,000 titles to choose from, make sure you see your next movie on DVD. Yeah.
Though VHS had attempted to peacefully coexist with DVDs for some time, with some companies even making hybrid players like the Sanyo one that I own, but the writing was soon on the wall as DVDs soon became the preferred format. The last major Hollywood film to be released on VHS was the 2005 film A History of Violence, marking the death of the format with the final stroke of the nail in its coffin. Funny enough, VCR players were still being produced afterwards, though in a very dwindling market. The last one was made by Japanese company Funai, stopping production due to poor sales and difficulty obtaining parts. Thus was the final nail in the coffin. Again.
So, if this format has been dead for over a decade and has been completely surpassed by superior technology, why am I so obsessed with these tapes? A few reasons.
First off, it is most definitely fueled by nostalgia. I'm not gonna hide that. The VHS was a big part of my childhood. I loved the fuzzy quality of the footage and the little scratches that buzz against the screen, and I'm willing to bet you are too, since I put a ton of those VHS effects throughout this episode and previous. Secondly, a lot of tapes are just really cheap right now. I got most of my tapes from the Savers in town, and just about all of them were only $1.
Considering the fact that a lot of content is starting to get gated off, and even then after you get through that paywall, there's even worse paywalls after that paywall, so this is a bit more of a logical investment. Plus you actually own these movies, which isn't the case with streaming services, but that's a discussion for another day.
It also helps that my setup for watching these movies was pretty cheap as well. I was able to get this hybrid VCR from my grandpa, so huge shout out to him. I already had a TV at the time, but I found this one for like $10, and it matches the color of my VCR. That's pretty awesome.
Thirdly, and this is going to sound so weird, but I think some movies are better on VHS than digital.
Alright, how on earth do I explain this one? I think it just comes down to the vibe the movie gives off when playing. I've seen Jurassic Park in high definition. Heck, I've even seen it on an IMAX screen before. But when I watch it on VHS, something just feels different about it. Maybe the lower quality of the video makes the CGI effects look more convincing? I'm not really sure how to elaborate more than that. If you get the chance, watch a movie that's on VHS and in digital and see if you feel a difference in the vibe that it gives off. Maybe I'm just a crazy person. All caught up? Good. Now you may be thinking to yourself, gee, that was a lot of useless backstory, but I'm a little intrigued now. You are? Good. Come with me. Let me show you my private collection. I know you'll find it quite diverting. My shrine beauty. These are all the VHS tapes I've managed to gather, either through thrift shopping or raiding bins within my parents' garage. Might as well show off what I consider to be the absolute gems of my collection. Let's start with the one that, unironically, got me into getting all of these tapes. I am dead serious. After seeing the waking nightmare that was the Tom Hooper movie, I just had to know what the actual stage show was like. Turns out, it's not even that bad. Yeah, imagine my surprise when I actually started getting into the actual Cat show. This movie was direct-to-video, and it's a recreation of the show on stage with a few small changes. Think something similar to the Hamilton Pro Shot that came out last year. It's definitely not your typical Broadway musical. There's still no true story, but it's more about the choreography of the dancing than anything else. I can totally understand why this was such a big hit when it first hit stage. Somewhat speaking of the musical genre, here's a film that I don't think gets a lot of attention nowadays, and that's Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Released in 2000, this movie follows a trio of convicts in the 1930s played by George Clooney, John Turturro, and Tim Blake Nelson as they travel across Mississippi to find a treasure that was buried by George Clooney's character. This movie was made by the Coen brothers a couple years after they made The Big Lebowski, and it is heavily influenced by Homer's Odyssey. One of the recurring jokes in the film is the trio creating an alias of a band called the Soggy Bottom Boys, and they record a song called I Am the Man of Constant Sorrow, and by God, this song has no right to slap this hard. The movie was nominated for a couple Academy Awards, but afterwards I think it just kind of faded away from public consciousness, which is a darn shame. If you get the chance, give this film a viewing. It's definitely worth the hassle to find. Speaking of critical darlings, I own Citizen Kane, which is not something I thought I'd say for a long time. I thought this was one of the most celebrated films of all time, and it cost me $1. Go figure. It was pretty cool to see one of the most iconic films of all time. It felt like I had crossed some sort of barrier when it comes to being a fan of film. The movie was pretty good. I probably won't watch it again for another year or two, but I'm glad I saw it. Another classic film in my collection is 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. A nuclear bomb test is conducted in the Arctic and it awakens a giant dinosaur that starts rampaging down the American coastline. The stop-motion effects were done by Ray Harryhausen, who also worked on films like Jason and the Argonauts and Clash of the Titans. While the green screen effects can look pretty cheesy, a lot of it still holds up and looks pretty good. I love the use of the low-angle shots to give this creature its presence and size. Actually, now that I think about it, doesn't this seem pretty familiar? Well, it should, because this film was a direct inspiration to the Godzilla franchise, and surprise, surprise, the Big G is in my collection too. Looks like Kong wants to get in on the fun as well. He looks so excited. Although Godzilla Raids Again set the standard for the typical Godzilla story, I feel like this movie gives a much clearer sense of what a majority of these films were going to be. Lots of human dialogue, the monsters destroying miniatures, and then a big battle right at the end. If it ain't broke, keep breaking every pagoda you can find. Oh yeah, and I have the 1998 movie here too, but that's nothing more than a guilty pleasure. Hey, as long as we're talking guilty pleasures, I've got Mortal Kombat in here too. This movie is so cheesy, but it's also so much fun to watch. I'd say my enjoyment of it is somewhere along the lines of Scooby-Doo.
You know, the James Gunn movie. The one we all pretend to like even though it's really, really bad. That's Mortal Kombat.
Hey, here's Sam Raimi's Spider-Man from 2002. I'm only showing it off here because it comes pre-packaged with the Nickelback.
If you thought that moment was weird, you haven't even seen the weirdest ones I've got.
For example, I have this one random Richard Gere movie called Strike Force. It's some TV movie from the 70s where an FBI agent and a detective team up to take down a drug ring. But it's surprisingly rather dull. Like, if you think TV movies now are bad, they are, but so much nothing happens in Strike Force that it's on a whole other level. Not weird enough? How about Thomas and the Magic Railroad? I used to watch this all the time as a kid, but now I think it's just so bafflingly weird. This is the movie where Alec Baldwin does this.
Sparkle, sparkle, sparkle.
This is an Emmy Award-winning actor, and here's a copy of Mike Myers' The Cat in the Hat. Ah!
Alright, enough messing around. Let's get to the cream of the crop, the best of the best, the movies I take the most pride in owning.
Starting off, we have the first two Terminator films. Like a lot of franchises that live past their prime, there was a time when this series was the best of the best. Best horror, best action, best soul. These movies really had it all. Oh, and would you look at that? I've got Aliens in here too. Aliens is one of the best sequels ever made. It successfully changes genres, ups the stakes without feeling contrived, improved the already incredible effects, and is just all around a solid package. James Cameron may have only ever made 10 films as a director, and given how often the Avatar sequels are delayed, it'll probably stay that way, but these movies are easily of his best. Oh, and Titanic is here too. Cool. I've also got Tremors here, and yes, I am still a proud Tremors defender. This was not a joke. I meant every word I said about the original film in the last Halloween episode, and it still stands. Tremors is so much fun, and I will never get enough of it. It's well made, and it deserves your love as well. Please just watch Tremors so I don't sound like a crazy person hyping up these worm movies. Up next, Jurassic Park. I honestly think that this is probably the most perfect tape in my collection. Before a lot of movies on these tapes, there's always some sort of ad before the movie even starts, which can be real annoying to fast forward through. But not with this tape, it just cuts right to the movie. Good thing that movie happens to be one of the best science fiction films of all time. Jurassic Park is basically perfect. Perfect acting, perfect effects, perfect pacing, perfect writing. It's everything that it needs to be and more. I've always loved this movie and the book it's based off of, which I occasionally go back and read every once in a while.
Now for the real prize of my hunts through the thrift shops, the one movie that towers over the rest. Now I know what you think, of course it was going to be Star Wars, we all know you by this point. No, I don't think you understand how important this tape is to me. This tape was released before the special editions.
Aside from Lucas putting A New Hope at the beginning of the opening crawl, this is Star Wars as it was always meant to be seen. There's no random added scenes. There's no distracting CGI. Han even shoots first in this one. I am baffled that a movie like this would get donated.
This is like a collector's item. A nerd would kill for this movie. You could have at least made a couple bucks online.
As someone who is a big fan of the medium of film, I feel so lucky to be able to see this film in its intended form, a relic lost to time. Even in this outdated format, I feel as if my world is a little bit more whole.
Not to mention, I also have a copy of Empire Strikes Back. I couldn't find one of Return of the Jedi, but not for lack of trying. Rest assured, I am looking for it. But in the meantime, I've got the special editions. I mean, it's not the right way to see Star Wars. These are terrible, but I can appreciate them for what they are. But I've also got the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray, I just love seeing it in crystal clear quality. Heck, I even have the Blu-ray copies of the prequels and the sequels. I don't really even like these movies, but, you know, it's nice to have them. Oh, don't forget the Clone Wars movie. It's not even mentioning the merchandising, the video games, the patented vehicle designs, the books, the Lego sets, the costumes, the lightsabers, their copies of the script, the fan-made props. Wow, there's a lot of Star Wars. Maybe too much Star Wars. How can there be too much Star Wars? When do you know there's too much Star Wars? What if I get sick of Star Wars?